one sleeper player that you like a lot more than the others, and a guy that is supposed to be a high first-round pick or top 10 pick that you don't like as much.
I'll start with that first one, that second one. Someone I don't like quite as much. I would say Lukas Van Ness. We've been seeing him really mocked towards the bottom of that top 10. I think he's a good player. He's just like that classic tweener who, he plays interior defensive line at Iowa, and then people are, projecting him to play outside end a lot more in the NFL. He's got the athleticism to do it, but we've seen guys like Derek Barnett, for Philly. I mean, he's not like amazing. We've seen like a number of these guys, they end up being like 6, 7, 8 sack guys. They're fine. I'm not taking a top 10 pick on that. Someone that I like probably more than others, I'd say Cameron Mitchell. He's a cornerback out of Northwestern. You see him usually on day 3. And even Alex Austin, a cornerback out of Oregon State. This is really like a great draft to get a good cornerback in those middle to late rounds. Both those guys, good athletes, both tested off the charts, especially compared to maybe what people expected out of them. They were really solid cover players, both of them really smooth. They're lockdown type of players, but they didn't have a ton of ball production. And I think that's where they probably suffered. And like the COVID year also changed everyone's perspective. Like you have older prospects in this class because of that COVID year. I'd look at those two guys though, and I think they can both be year one impact players for any defense they go on to.
Ian, I think when you look at Tampa, they have Baker Mayfield starting this year. I believe if there's any team that can move up in this draft and get Richardson, it's Tampa. I think him sitting back behind Baker Mayfield for a year. I don't trust Bowles, okay? I don't think he's the guy that's going to help this kid figure it out in the NFL. But nevertheless, I could see Tampa moving up in this draft and getting a quarterback. Do you see Tampa doing something like that, or do you think at 19 they sit there and maybe add an offensive lineman?
I think they make sense as a team that would go all in, and they kind of have one of two directions, right? Like, do they double down and do they really make that big push? They've got a win now roster. They've got a team that can play. Like, if they want to extend Devin White, they could do that. If they wanted to keep Mike Evans and extend him, they can do that. So I think they're at a really tough pivot point. I think it depends on how far these guys fall, right? Like a week ago, we were saying Will Levis is just going to fall to them at 19. That's one conversation. That's a different risk. You're talking about moving this year's first, next year's first, probably at least 1 or 2 second-round picks, or maybe even White, maybe even Evans, depending on how far you're trading up, to start to get someone that probably won't be ready to play for a year or two. And I think Bowles, he would have to be pretty secure in his job, I think, to make a deal like that. And he may not even have to say.
He's gone.
It may just be a Jason Licht thing.
He is gone at the end of this year.
I'm not a Bowles head coach guy. I'm sure you're not either. Like,
I'm a Jet fan. Do you think I really like Todd Bowles?
No, I'm sure you don't. I'm sure. And I don't blame you. He's just not a good, I don't think he's head coach material. And so there's no shame in it. There's only 10 good ones. So I wouldn't be surprised because Tampa has a history of being aggressive. I think their path really relies on Houston being silly at number 2, not taking a quarterback, and you would have to hope that either Detroit or Seattle also pass a quarterback. If those two things happen, I think Tampa Bay is really going to start working the phones. I also think you're going to see Tennessee really working the phones to start moving up too.
Ian, before we let you go quickly, where do all 4 quarterbacks land in the first round?
Young
the big
Carolina,
ones.
I think Stroud still goes to Houston. I think they probably just take him too. I don't think they're going to get too crazy. I would say Levis. I'll say Levis goes to Tennessee, and then Richardson goes to the Colts.
Wow.
I think Tennessee moves up to like 8 or something and takes Levis.
Well, Indianapolis drafts at 4, so they would
I
go
think
after
they take Richardson.
Really?
Yeah, I think they do.
Interesting.